Yeah, today I thought to talk about one of the 7 factors of enlightenment, called investigation of the Dhamma, in Pali called Dhamma Vicaya. Yeah, the 7 enlightenment factors, they are one of the most important sets of qualities that the Buddha was teaching that lead to awakening. And if you develop these qualities, basically leading to awakening, and the 7 are mindfulness, investigation of the Dhamma, energy or effort, rapture, tranquility, and samadhi, unification of the mind, and equanimity. And so this quality of Dhamma Vicaya is investigation of Dhamma is one of these 7 qualities. Dhamma Vicaya means on the one hand investigating the teaching of the Buddha, but then also investigating the nature of things. And the Dhamma is the law of nature, of cause and effect, basically by which the universe or conditioned phenomena operate. And so when the Buddha realizes awakening, he completely understands this law of nature, of cause and effect, by which the universe operates, conditioned phenomena, sankharas. And then he teaches this law of nature that he discovered himself to others, so in order that they can realize liberation as well. And this law of nature is timeless, is always the same whether a Buddha arises in the world and teaches it or not. Yeah, and this is the law how conditioned phenomena, sankharas, and suffering originates, and how they can come to cessation, and also the practice, the method that leads to liberation, to the cessation of suffering. And so basically the Dhamma is both this law of nature and then the teaching of the Buddha explaining it. And so if you want to discover the same law of causality, that the same path that the Buddha discovered, then we have to investigate the Dhamma, both the teaching of the Buddha and also the sense of the nature of things in our own mind. So it has both meanings. And so to develop this quality of investigation of Dhamma, on the one hand, you have to get to know the meaning of the teaching of the Buddha, but then also getting to know the teaching of the Buddha so that you can recognize what the Buddha is talking about in your own experience. And so basically that the teaching of the Buddha becomes a teaching about reality and about the qualities in your own heart and mind. And only then will you be able to apply it effectively. So on the one hand, getting to know the teaching and then trying to explore and see what the Buddha is talking about in your own heart and mind. And the Buddha talks about both aspects of it, investigating the Dhamma in terms of remembering the Dhamma and thinking about the Dhamma, basically knowing the Dhamma intellectually, but then also in terms of investigating, for example, while practicing meditation. So both is relevant. Yeah, and so basically the Buddha describes this quality recognizing which states in your mind or in your heart are defilements or wholesome qualities, or as I call it, dark and bright qualities, and then like recognizing this in your own mind, and you're basically directing one's attention to that, noticing that, learning to notice that, and then, yeah, if you do that, you get more and more clarity about the teaching of the Buddha, and also about basically this law of nature in terms of how does suffering arise in your own mind. If you notice these qualities that the Buddha is talking about, then yeah, you can gradually see that in yourself. And in the sense of the dependent origination, in the sense of the origin of suffering, and then the cessation of suffering, and then also what qualities in the mind, if they get stronger, lead to more disturbance or more suffering, and which qualities in the mind, if you develop it, lead to the cessation of suffering, and observing that, and basically getting to know that. But this investigation of Dhamma is also closely connected with the fourth foundation of mindfulness. That's, I would describe it like this: that you dwell with regard to things contemplating the Dhamma, or you dwell with regard to things seeing the Dhamma. So basically, contemplating the Dhamma in your own experience, or seeing the teaching of the Buddha in your own experience, depending on the depth of your development. So basically looking at your own experience in your own mind, into your own mind, in terms of these qualities that the Buddha was teaching, like the 5 hindrances or the Four Noble Truths, the 7 Enlightenment factors, when are they present, when are they not present, and how does it work to develop them or abandon them. And basically seeing your own experience more and more in light of the Dhamma. In terms of, usually we look at our experience in terms of self or who we are and what we are, and then having this different perspective on our own experience. But to discover this law of nature, basically understanding this process of origination of suffering and the cessation of suffering, liberation, it's not enough to just watch passively, but one basically has to practically engage with the mind. Basically, it's also why the Buddha formulates the Four Noble Truths as a task. So basically, what you have to do. So, for example, with the path, it has to be developed. So basically, you have to engage in this effort, in this activity of developing, or with the origin of suffering, it has to be abandoned. And so you have to basically engage with the mind to actually basically find out how it works. Because otherwise you won't find it out. And it's just like with experimenting with something, you have to get to know, basically getting a deeper understanding how your own mind or heart is working, or how the origin of suffering, how is this, what's going on there. And otherwise, you will not discover that. And so that's also important. And only then, basically, trying to apply the teaching of the Buddha trying to find these qualities that the Buddha is talking about and applying it, and until we become so proficient or skillful that we actually discover, basically, or realize liberation, cessation for the first time. We experience for the first time a glimpse of the deathless Nibbana. And once we have seen ourselves that these qualities that the Buddha is teaching, Noble Eightfold Path, if we have really seen that they lead to the cessation of suffering, and that the qualities that he describes as defilements, they are actually really the origin of suffering, then also we won't have any doubt anymore, or perplexity. What is actually the origin of suffering? We will not have any doubt anymore how we can abandon actually suffering and realize complete peace. Because we have discovered this method, the Noble Eightfold Path, for ourselves, by our own efforts and understanding how our own mind works. Yeah, so in this way, developing this quality of investigation of Dhamma leads also to abandoning of doubt, because we have seen the same law of causality that the Buddha has discovered. We have seen it ourselves by developing the mind and trying to apply the teaching of the Buddha. So basically, because we have experienced the cessation of dukkha ourselves, and so we have found this path leading to liberation. Yeah, just like, for example, many centuries ago, people used to be afraid of solar eclipses and lunar eclipses because it was mysterious and frightening to them. Because they didn't understand the causality behind an eclipse, behind a solar eclipse or lunar eclipse. But once you know how this works, then there's actually nothing frightening or mysterious about it. And so in the same way, if we have basically observed this causality, this law of nature, and seen it in our own mind by applying the teaching of the Buddha, then we will also be free from doubt or perplexity, and this is an effect of this developing this quality of investigation of Dhamma, having this clarity, seeing, knowing the teaching of the Buddha, and then seeing in our own mind how it can be applied, and how the mind works. Basically, using the teaching of the Buddha as a tool to gain understanding of the causality of our own mind or heart, in terms of what leads to liberation and what leads to suffering. And so this is basically the effect of this investigation of Dhamma. And yeah, so also in this sense, the Buddha describes it. On the one hand, one factor is the intellectual understanding of the teaching of the Buddha by reading discourses, and the other factor, which leads to deeper understanding, is then actually applying it, and in sense of meditation or internal development of inner qualities. And so both together then leading to this clarity and understanding the process of the mind. And then further, the Buddha also talks about the seven enlightenment factors as a sequence. So, for example, first, in the sense of mindfulness, that you have the teaching in mind and investigate it. And then, because you know about the teaching, you apply your effort, your energy, and then because of that, basically the other enlightenment factors arise, like rapture or tranquility or samadhi and equanimity. Okay, some questions about it or any other topics you would like to talk about? Mm-hmm. I think it's closely connected in the sense of that, because also usually wisdom is defined as understanding the Four Noble Truths, so I think these are very closely connected, or like a synonym in a way I would say. Yeah. But it's I think would be these are like the active, basically the result of applying this Dhamma Vicaya is wisdom. Then in a way you can one can look at it in terms of the cause which leads to wisdom, then as a result, and basically this investigation is then will lead you to more wisdom in terms of understanding your own heart or mind better. Exactly, in this sense, yeah. Yes, exactly, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is this closely connected to the fourth of the four foundation of mindfulness?
Yes.
Exactly the same?
I think for me it's similar because, I mean, it depends on the translation. The fourth foundations of mind, the fourth of the four satipatthana is translated sometimes differently. Sometimes they translate Dhamma as mind objects, while the word Dhamma can have many meanings, and it's used for the objects of the mind sense, but also, there's this general meaning of Dhamma. If you look what is described there in the discourse of the four foundations of mindfulness, then basically what I said, it means you look or investigate your experience in terms of the Dhamma, or you see your experience in terms of the Dhamma. So basically for example, you see when is mindfulness present, when is it not present, or when is energy or effort present and when is it not present, and or when is aversion present and when is not present, and then also, for example, how can for example, if mindfulness is there, how can it be developed and get stronger, and or then also, for example, in terms of either sort of defilements or good qualities, looking at your mind in these terms, and then also in terms of, say, the five aggregates, in terms of form or feeling, and basically, rather than seeing or experience in the usual way, more and more looking at your experience in terms of, in light of the Dhamma, terms of seeing exactly these qualities that the Buddha is describing in his discourses in your own experience, and then understanding how does that work. For example, with the enlightenment factors, how can it be, let's say, for samadhi, unification of the mind, peacefulness. How does it work? How does that arise? And how can it get stronger? And so basically by applying your Dhamma practice, then you get this experiential knowledge. How does that happen? Or similar with mindfulness, how can mindfulness get stronger? And how can you sort of apply for yourself for that? And by that, you're basically get an understanding of your own mind. And then also, seeing, for example, they were noticing the Vedana or feeling, and the other 5 khandhas, actually seeing your experience in light of that. Those will be examples. So, or in terms of the Four Noble Truths as well. So basically, seeing which portion of your experience is dukkha, suffering, which is the origin of suffering, and so on, and what qualities are the paths leading to cessation of suffering, and noticing that in your own experience, and then sort of working with that, and basically changing the way you look at your own experience and your own mind. And usually we just have this experience of this, all these different states and things appearing there. But then if you look at your mind or your heart in terms of these qualities, it's actually not so much or not so diverse. They're just these few things that the Buddha is describing, and so we just don't have we don't really know what is helpful in terms of how to sort of categorize our experience, in terms of what should be abandoned, what should be developed, and so on. We just sort of have all these mind states and don't know what to do with them. I mean, usually in the average person, and so then getting a sense, okay, these are these qualities, and then sort of learning how to work with it and seeing them. And so also this, for example, this fourth foundation of mindfulness, it's from the most basic to the most profound, in the sense that, for example, usually a person can notice if he has aversion or not, and so, or whatever, if he has doubt or not, so or if he's rather lazy or energetic or things like that, and so usually one can at least. It's not like impossible to find that, even if you just read the discourse at the first time, you can somehow notice that, or let's say can notice maybe when does the mind get more disturbed or less. So can be from this most basic level up to the most profound one. For example, then the realization of an arahant is so that then at that time he dwells in this fourth satipatthana. He understands this is dukkha and this is the origin of dukkha. That's how it is usually described. So it's this dwelling, this fourth satipatthana can be from the most basic to the most profound, seeing the Dhamma or contemplating the Dhamma.